BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. The Zodiac Killer was an unidentified serial killer from California who operated in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio@aol.com, and this show is available for downloads anywhere you get your podcasts. The first thing I would like to talk to you guys about is the new video that is available on David Oranchak's channel, Let's Crack the Zodiac. This is one that is exploring the theory put forward by Dale Julian in his book, Catching Zodiac. And I must say, this is a long overdue video from David Oranchak because Dale Julian's book came out about 11 months ago. But Dale made a video talking about some of the attempted solutions to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery that were proposed by Dale Julian. You guys will remember Dale Julian as being one of the proponents of the theory involving Gary Francis Post as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And in fact, Dale Julian is perhaps the most significant individual in advancing the narrative involving Gary Francis Post, although he wasn't the first person to talk about Gary Post as a Zodiac suspect. As he says very clearly in his book, Catching Zodiac, he obtained this information from an informant named Chris Avery, and then he went on to explore the case on his own, and he was contacted by a group called the Case Breakers, who ultimately publicized the findings in 2021. But when Dale released his book, he finally shared with us some of the ways that he explored the mystery, some of the ways that he used to decipher the Zodiac Killer's hidden messages and uncover the Zodiac's identity. And one of them was using anagrams, by taking the text of the Halloween card firstly and rearranging the letters to get new messages. Firstly, the name Gary Francis Post, and then putting more words into sentences, and ultimately he was able to create multiple paragraphs of text from the Halloween card. And David Oranchak released a counter video on his channel Let's Crack the Zodiac, which simply stated that this can be done with almost any set of text. This can be done with almost any multi-paragraph length piece of text, or especially if you're going to use things like cards, which also have clues from artwork. But what David was trying to share in his video is that there could be quintillions of possibilities that could be extracted from taking letters and rearranging them to form new words. Quintillions of possibilities. And we saw this very clearly in the Jack the Ripper case, when Richard Wallace published his book, Jack the Ripper, Lighthearted Friend, and Richard Wallace had Lewis Carroll as his Jack the Ripper suspect, and a core element of his explorations were focused on anagrams, taking paragraphs of Lewis Carroll's writings and rearranging the letters to make new messages. But some critics of Richard Wallace's book, Jack the Ripper, Lighthearted Friend, simply pointed out that they could take paragraphs from his own book, rearrange the letters to form sentences incriminating Richard Wallace in the murders, which would have been impossible. Wallace put out his book in 1996, so it's not the most practical approach, but I invite you to watch David Oranchak's video on Dale Julian's book, Catching Zodiac, and I also have a two-part book review of Catching Zodiac here on Black Box Online Radio, and there's also been something that's written out by Chad Burke in the Facebook group The Search for Zodiac, and this is another one of the Zodiac reports that I was talking to you guys about last week, and these are the words of Chad Burke here. Zodiac Report. It has been a while since I typed up a report. The Zodiac waters are as calm as a sheet of glass. The remaining hope for the shorter two codes to be solved seemingly sunk at an all-time low and perhaps even dead. So much, in fact, that the leading prominent Zodiac codebreaker, David Oranchak, the 340 cipher solver from Let's Crack the Zodiac series, had to resort to making a video about anagrams concerning the non-suspect, Gary Francis Post. I respect Dave to the fullest, and I legit feel bad that he ever felt compelled to make it in the first place. And no, I have not watched it, but I might, only because he made it. Sad when his kind and calm demeanor describing a fake solution is more entertaining than the code work itself, which I am certain was the case here. May something stir the waters soon. And one more time, this is one of the Zodiac reports, which you can read in the group, The Search for the Zodiac, run by Chad Burke. I think there is a way that I can encapsulate this message and share it in a different way. I think what Chad is trying to say with this post is, well, let's put it into a series of questions. Number one, why did David make that video if he doesn't agree with the conclusions? Why did he make a video just to debunk somebody's work? Why did he decide to devote time and effort? And it looks like he puts in a lot of effort into his videos when he could have been focusing on solving the Z13 and the Z32 ciphers. And I think that I can answer that. I think the answers to those questions would be very simply that somebody has proposed a solution that he does not agree with. Somebody has proposed something that he feels should be challenged. And also, if somebody has put their work and material out into the forefront the way that Dale Julian has done, should he not receive criticism? Should he not receive challenges if people genuinely do not agree with his findings? You can listen to my two-part book discussion where I challenged all kinds of things in Dale Julian's Catching Zodiac. But, Dale responded to me, and he agreed to be a guest on this program, and I have an interview with him when we discuss some of these observations that I made, as well as he has the chance to share his story here on Black Box Online Radio. Lots of content for you guys to check out. But I would definitely be on David's side with that, because he has the right to give his responses to material that's put out there. If someone writes a book, other people should be allowed to make a video-type response. That's just my take on the subject. You can put anything you want in the comment section down below if you have any comments about Gary Francis' post as a Zodiac Killer suspect, about the use of anagrams and the Zodiac Killer mystery. And also what Chad is talking about is there are two unconfirmed ciphers from the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac was a serial killer, but he also wrote letters, cards, and cryptograms. And the cryptograms are more commonly known as the ciphers, and the final two ciphers have not been solved. Now, I hope one day, some way, somehow, we will be able to solve the Z13 and the Z32, but a point where I do agree with Chad Burke is that it's becoming less and less likely. However, if we are some way, somehow able to identify the Zodiac Killer, then perhaps we will be able to know the solutions to the Z13 and or the Z32. And the next news item for you guys is that Adam Ivester, who runs the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, has completed a book called 55 Reasons Why John Parr Cox Was the Zodiac Killer. Adam believes that the Zodiac Killer was a wealthy businessman named John Parr Cox who lived in San Francisco, in Presidio Heights actually, near the location of the Zodiac Killer's final murder, the murder of Paul Stine on October 11th of 1969, and Adam is going to be releasing this book very soon, and he's going to put it online for free, so please stay tuned, and you can hear more about that on his channel, Real Zodiac Killer Revealed. And also, I invite you guys to check out the panel discussion show that is run by Mysteries with Mr. Belgique and Mr. B. Jerome from Belgium. And Mysteries with Mr. Belgique puts out a regular discussion program about the Zodiac Killer in the afternoons, Eastern Standard Time on Mondays. Monday is a great day to talk about the Zodiac. And I was a participant on the most recent panel discussion show, and I have to give credit to Shake Dog Shake for talking all about his Zodiac Killer suspect, Edward Wayne Edwards. And Ed Edwards is a widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspect, but what is really different with the theory involving Ed Edwards is that it expands into different true crime cases. And Shake Dog and I had the opportunity to talk about something that I felt was very bothering. And someone who also had the same concern was Ken Maines, who runs the channel Unsolved No More. And Ken Maines was, of course, on the History Channel Zodiac Killer program. And in one of his videos, Ken Maines was talking about how there is this belief that Ed Edwards was the Zodiac Killer, but he was also the Black Dahlia Avenger. And what I openly asked Shake Dog Shake was something that Ken Maines openly said on his channel. How on earth would it be possible for someone like Ed Edwards to have been the Black Dahlia Avenger, to have committed the murder of Elizabeth Short in 1947? Because Ed Edwards would have been 13 years old at the time. He was born in 1933, and the Black Dahlia murder occurred in January of 1947. So he hadn't had his 14th birthday yet. He would have been 13 years old. And Elizabeth Short was murdered. Her body was mutilated and dissected with surgical precision and you're saying that a 13-year-old did that, does that just not sound nearly impossible? And what Shake Dog, as well as Ed Edward Cyphers in the chat, were sharing is that the reason why those numbers are out there is that, number one, Ed Edwards was somebody who was known to use fake forms of identification and fake documents, and one of them is a fake birth certificate. That's their claim. That when you Google Edward Wayne Edwards, you'll see that he was born in 1933, and that date was taken from a fake birth certificate. And Ed Edward Cyphers in the chat even said that he would have been born in 1928, so he wouldn't have been 13 years old, he would have been 18 years old. I still think that would have been impossible for the Zodiac, or not the Zodiac, but the Black Dahlia murders, excuse me, for the Black Dahlia murder of Elizabeth Short being 18 years old. I'm still not seeing it because, again, this is someone who clearly had a fine understanding of surgery, but Shake Dog was even challenging that and saying he's most likely older than that. So if you're going to look at a Black Dahlia connection to somebody like Edward Wayne Edwards, it really rests on this theory involving fake documents. And you guys can weigh in the comment section down below if you have anything to say about the Black Dahlia Avenger case. Last week I was talking about another Black Dahlia Avenger suspect, Steve Hodel, Steve Hodel's father, George Hodel, is the suspect, and George Hodel is a suspect also in the Zodiac murders and the Black Dahlia Avenger case. Now this weekend, I sat down and I thought that I was going to watch some TV. And I just pulled up YouTube, and because I watch a lot of videos about the Zodiac Killer, they had one right at the top called We Found the Zodiac Killer, and it was 2 hours and 48 minutes long, and I was thinking, well, that's the end of that. I'm not going to be doing anything else this afternoon. I'm going to be watching this 2 hour and 48 minute video from the Paranormal Files called We Found the Zodiac Killer. And it started out going very well, actually. I had never heard of this channel before. It seems like a channel that covers many different subjects, but it was very well produced and put together for a YouTube video. And they were talking about some basic observations about the Zodiac, and then tying it into some of the suspects. So firstly, some observations about the Zodiac. They were citing a book that was written by Robert Kelleher and David Van Nuys that's called This is the Zodiac Speaking. A wonderful title. Let's use that title more often. This is the Zodiac Speaking. And it talked about the infrequency in Zodiac activity and providing an explanation for that, which the host of that channel agreed with. And specifically, the first Zodiac murder took place on December 20th of 1968 with the Lake Herman Road murders. The second crime took place on July 4th of 1969 with the Blue Rock Springs shooting. And there's roughly a 7-month gap between the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and this video called We Found the Zodiac Killer stated that it's most likely because of some type of contemplation issue where somebody committed their first murder, and then this person spent 7 months thinking, am I going to do this again? How will I do this again? Should I do this again? This person is just thinking, ruminating, planning, maybe unplanning, revising. Maybe they're having cold feet about doing it again. They're spending 7 months just perhaps trying to think about what their next move is. And again, this isn't an original observation that's put forward by the Paranormal Files, nor do they claim that it should be interpreted that way. They are saying that this is from the book, This is the Zodiac Speaking. However, I want to be very clear about something. I have strongly entertained that possibility in the past. I have openly said on this channel that I think that that's a completely defendable position. Why is there this 7-month gap from the Lake Herman Road murders to the Blue Rock Springs shooting? The Zodiac maybe committed his first murder at Lake Herman Road. Maybe there was no pre-Zodiac activity. Maybe the Zodiac didn't commit murders in 1962, 63, 64, and 66. Maybe he committed his first crimes on December 20th of 1968, murdering David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, and then he's just trying to think for 7 months. Should I do this again? Will I get caught this time? And it's just this type of mental battle. Then he finally does on July 4th of 1969, and there's no turning back. He crossed the plain, and there was no going back, and he was now starting his journey to become the Zodiac Killer. But what I have to give as a form of pushback is they're presenting that as a fact, that this is why there's that 7-month gap in the timeline. And I'm just sitting there in the audience thinking, whoa, now wait a second, wait a second. How on earth can we say with certainty that that's what happened? I mean, it's a possibility, and it's a reasonable possibility, but how can we say with certainty that that's what happened? Here's something else. Here's something else. Number one, the Zodiac could have been stationed somewhere because of the military, because of a job. Number two, the Zodiac could have been incarcerated. He could have spent a short time in prison, roughly, let's say, 6 months perhaps. A lot of people can get sent to jail for 6 months. And number three, he could have been committing crimes elsewhere, and that he also just did not have some type of connection to the Bay Area. Maybe he didn't want to report it immediately because he thought it would give himself away. Number four, he may have attempted a crime. And Michael Cole even talked about this. Michael Cole, author of the Zodiac Revisited trilogy, specifically when I interviewed him, he said that it's possible that the Zodiac could have attempted a crime that was closer to the spring equinox, and maybe, just maybe, it was unsuccessful. He tried to murder a person, maybe even by rope, but it was unsuccessful. And then here's another one, that the murders were not random. They were not chosen because of some type of rage-fueled incident where the Zodiac is just losing control of his emotions. They weren't chosen just because the Zodiac is going crazy one night. Instead, the murders happened on specific dates for calculated reasons. So there are so many possibilities as to why that 7-month gap exists. And to present it as a factual statement that, oh, well, this is why the Zodiac waited 7 months to commit the crime, is because this is what he was thinking, absolutely uncertain. And I think that they perhaps were just putting it forward as something that maybe they were highly entertaining, but that channel, the Paranormal Files, did not present it that way. They presented it more as a fact. So the next point in their video that I thought was really interesting was when they zoned in on the South Dakota connection. And the South Dakota connection just relates to a couple different things in the Zodiac Killer mystery, but the host of the Paranormal Files was actually from Sioux Falls, South Dakota. Again, I've never heard of this channel before I watched their video. So I was just sitting down and watching that, and he's like, wow, what a shocker. I'm from South Dakota, and there's a South Dakota connection to Donna Lass. Donna Lass is a possible Zodiac Killer victim who went missing on September 6th of 1970. Her skull was found in 1986 in Placer County, California, and in 2023 she was positively identified. It took 37 years to make the identification, but originally Donna Lass was from South Dakota, and the host of the Paranormal Files was thinking that, hey, wow, what a shocking coincidence. And I really don't think that that is a shocking coincidence because, for example, we also have the Zodiac Killer suspect Richard Gaikowski, who was born in Watertown, South Dakota. Donna Lass was from Beresford, South Dakota. And based on the amount of people that are involved in the Zodiac Killer case, there is really just so many possibilities and connections that we are going to have. For example, the Zodiac Killer suspect Michael O'Hare was working in Massachusetts, in Boston, Massachusetts, and if somebody lived in Massachusetts, they're going to have that type of shocking coincidence issue going on. Or say, for example, if you have a suspect from Nevada, like Lawrence Kane, so he spent time in Nevada, the host of the program is from Nevada, and he might think, oh, hey, wow, what a shocking coincidence. You're going to find numerous connections, numerous personal connections among the victims to various parts of the country. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how nationwide the Zodiac Killer case truly is. But I want to focus on another point that was shared by the Paranormal Files. Now, hence the name, the Paranormal Files. I'm not going to lie, this video got very big on the paranormal stuff. It started out with like a solid hour of just Zodiac commentary, going through Zodiac Killer facts, Zodiac discussions, pulling up all types of video clips, talking about the Zodiac Killer, and then it evolved into a paranormal discussion. I'm really, really going to try and stay away from this spirit talk or looking at possible things about connecting with ghosts. I'm just going to leave that stuff out of this presentation, and instead I want to focus on something when they zoned in on a communication that was written by the Zodiac Killer called the 408 Cipher. And in the Zodiac Killer's 408 Cipher, he says that when I die, I will be reborn in paradise, and those whom I have killed will be my slaves. on the Halloween card that I mentioned previously, it also says Slaves in Paradise. On the 340 cipher, which I mentioned previously, it also says Slaves in Paradise. And what they said is that there's a very strong occult element to the Zodiac Killer's persona. There's a strong occult element to the Zodiac Killer murders, even. And I can agree with the persona, but not the murders. This might be something that is unpopular. This might be something that a lot of people are going to disagree with me on, but I'm not seeing any occult element in the murders. I'm not seeing any ounce of occult connection to the Zodiac Killer murders. Instead, I think it's going in the exact opposite direction. Because even if the Zodiac Killer believed this stuff about slaves in paradise, that he's going to die and be reborn in paradise and his victims will be his slaves, he did not say anything about that at Lake Berryessa. At Lake Berryessa, when the Zodiac Killer held up Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at gunpoint and he stabbed the victims, he had numerous times to say, "I'm going to kill you. I want you to be my slaves in the afterlife." He said nothing of the sort, even after they were tied up. Yeah, okay, you could be like, well, he didn't want to scare them. They were tied up and stabbed, and he didn't say anything to the effect of, "When you die, you will be my slaves in paradise." So that tells me that the Zodiac did not use an occult element in his murders, and I am also going to take a very unpopular stance. And this might not be what some people want to hear, but I just don't believe that the Zodiac Killer cared at all about slaves in paradise. I think it was all made up. I think it was just a distraction. I think he was just trying to scare people and make people uncomfortable, and in many ways that he did, but I pretty much think that all of that stuff was dishonest on the part of the Zodiac Killer. Now, some of the more interesting elements of the video that was made by the Paranormal Files focus on their interpretations of the suspects. And I said I would stay away from the paranormal aspects of this, but they're using their, equipment to scan for paranormal activity, and they can even feed it into something that they were calling the spirit box, and it would generate some words, which I think is partnered with AI and ChatGPT to a certain extent, but some of the words that they were able to get out of this spirit box were the words Larry, and of course that could be like Larry Kane, and I think they even got realty out, which is quite odd because Larry Kane was a realtor, Lawrence Kane, born Lawrence Klein. But what was more interesting is they pulled up the name Lance. And Lance might not sound like a name that is recognized by everybody, but Lance is also the name of a Zodiac Killer suspect whom I've never discussed before on this channel, and his name is Lance Voss. And I want to take a step back from any of this paranormal stuff, and I just want to talk to you guys about Lance Voss as a Zodiac Killer suspect. And I have to give a shout out to longtime BBOR listener Batman66, who was the first person to tell me about not only Lance Voss, but also a podcast that had been done about him called the Snake River Killer Podcast. And they look at a set of murders that took place in the western part of the United States called the Lewis Clark Valley Murders, also known as the Snake River Killings. And Lance Voss is going to make his way into the Zodiac Killer world in a different type of way. Firstly, he is an alternative Zodiac Killer suspect, and there are other write-ups about him online and his Zodiac Killer involvement. But you can hear the Snake River Killer podcast on Spotify as well as anywhere else you get your podcasts, and they have a two-part special on the Zodiac Killer, and to be very honest, I just listened to their first episode, and their two-part Zodiac set of episodes, which are called The Most Dangerous Game. Now, that is also a reference to the Zodiac Killer's 408 cipher. However, Lance Voss is someone who was not convicted for the Lewis Clark Valley murders or the Snake River killings. Instead, he is viewed as the prime suspect, and I think a fair way to put this is the thesis statement of the Snake River Killer podcast is, yes, Lance Voss was a murderer, and yes, he was someone who did not get convicted. He got away with it, is perhaps a fair way of putting it. But let's look at some connections between the Lewis Clark Valley murders and the Zodiac Killer mystery, and then let's analyze Lance Voss as a Zodiac Killer suspect. To provide the most basic introduction, the Lewis Clark Valley murders refers to a cluster of unsolved murders and disappearances that occurred in the Lewis-Clarkston metropolitan area of Idaho in 1979 and 1982. Law enforcement investigators have identified 4 victims and possibly a 5th that are connected to a single suspect. And let's just jump ahead. In 1984, Idaho State Police stated that a serial killer named Otis Toole had implicated himself in the murder of one of the victims and was their strongest suspect, but added that two other men had also confessed to the same crime. And Otis Toole is someone whom I haven't talked about a lot here on this channel. I've mentioned him a little bit in the older True Crime Talk radio episodes, but Otis Toole confessed to a bunch of other things, not as many as Henry Lee Lucas, but some people just believe that those two men were confessing to all kinds of crimes to get rewards when they were in prison. In 2009, a retired Lewiston police detective who had interviewed Toole stated that he had ruled him out as a suspect. In 1998, the authorities from Spokane, Washington, who were investigating the killings, would later be attributed to Robert Lee Yates, but they were also interviewed, and ultimately the attention would go on to another suspect named Lance Voss, and there's also another post that was written about him on the Lewis Clark Valley Serial Killer Facebook page. In a conversation with someone who knew the suspect, they said that Lance Voss had mentioned Peoria, Illinois, which is about 154 miles from Chicago, where Lance Voss grew up. From talking with the people who knew Lance Voss, they claimed that he liked to talk in riddles, and if you could figure out the riddle and what he was talking about, he would be elated. The admins of this page did some research on the history of Peoria, Illinois, and discovered that in 1962, there was a case of Deborah Carter who was strangled with a scarf by the one-year-old family dog named Cinder. Wow, so bizarre. The Peoria County coroner's jury investigated the case and ruled that Deborah Carter died of strangulation in some unknown manner. The coroner's jury urged the proper authorities to continue an investigation into her death, and the 4 newspaper articles posted are what has been found at the time about Deborah Carter's case. So that's a very bizarre story, but I think what the implication is that they think that their suspect, Lance Voss, should also be a suspect in the murder of Deborah Carter from 1962. Now, if you do want to listen to these episodes about the Snake River killings, the Lewis Clark Valley murders, it's a little bit hard on Snake River Killer podcast because it's done in the pure audio format, and they're referencing lots of images, and they say stuff like, if you want to see a photo of our suspect, you can go to our website, snakeriverkiller.com. If you want to see photos of our suspect, you can go to our website, snakeriverkiller.com. If you want to see photos of the location, you can go to our website, snakeriverkiller.com. And just every 5th sentence in the episodes that I was listening to out of those 3 episodes was just that, some type of promotion for the website so they could share the visual imagery. But overall, I wanted to give every suspect a fair shake. And they provided some interesting things about how they had documented Lance Voss's movements, and that he was in Northern California at the time of the Zodiac murders. So I'm thinking, alright, I'm going to hear them out. Let's look at what they have to say about their suspect, and also he has a military background in the Navy. Okay, I'm going to hear them out. Let's just see what else we can find. And you even heard that thing from the Facebook page about how he likes to talk in riddles and play games with people. Games that could be connected to homicides. Well, that also sounds like the Zodiac Killer. But I found a very lengthy write-up about Lance Voss that was on Tappa Talk, exploring him as a Zodiac Killer suspect, which was completely unconnected to snakeriverkiller.com, and it stated just that his height was listed at 6'3" to 6'4", which I think is mostly a cause for elimination. Not 100%, not 100%, but the witness sightings of the Zodiac Killer that we have are talking about somebody who was 5 feet 8 inches tall, 5 feet 10 inches tall, and 6 feet tall, and 6'3", 6'4". I think that he was too tall to have been the Zodiac Killer, so I don't mean to just throw water on this type of theory, but as I was listening to the episodes, The Most Dangerous Game that's available on the Snake River Killer podcast, I know that they're talking about a suspect, and they're trying to explore the possible connection that could this individual, Lance Voss, have been the Snake River Killer and the Zodiac Killer. And the whole time I was just thinking, how much do they actually believe this? Because a lot of the connections that they had to the story were fairly light. Now, it's interesting to note about his whereabouts and what type of military background and what type of education he would have had, but we're talking about 2 hours of podcast content, and other than that, I really didn't hear too much. And part of me was even wondering, were these episodes made because they were trying to connect with a different type of audience and trying to share their message with a different type of audience? And I'm giving you guys that only as a suspicion and nothing more than that, but ultimately that's where I stand, and you can hear the episodes that if you want to listen to them, they're on the Snake River Killer podcast, available anywhere you get your podcasts, and the 2 episodes are called The Most Dangerous Game. And right now I would like to get to your supporter shoutouts. You can use buymeacoffee.com/blackboxned88 to make a donation or contribution to help support the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And our first shout out goes to Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. And Batman66 has also been helping out a lot with the YouTube shorts that come out Monday through Friday, maybe some bonus ones on the weekend. I apologize for not putting out a lot of shorts last week entirely, actually. But the short episodes will resume, and they will be coming out to you daily here on Black Box Online Radio, as well as on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned Dahan, but you can also get them on Instagram, BlackBoxNed88, and TikTok, BlackBoxNed88. And as always, you can like and subscribe over there on the other platforms if you so choose. And our next one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. River Prawn Pottery, thank you as well for your regular and consistent support. All of it is appreciated. In fact, you two guys have been absolutely amazing. And our next one comes to us on buymeacoffee.com from Mr. Sean. And Mr. Sean says, BBOR, quality and quantity. Well, that's why I have to get back to making YouTube shorts, because I'm going to try my best to keep those coming out. And also, there will be a Cooper Friday episode coming out this weekend. Every Friday I do an episode about D.B. Cooper. I'm going to try my best to get back to making Wednesday episodes about Jack the Ripper, but just dealing with some offline issues right now. But thank you to everyone who has left a donation or contribution on this channel. You can also use the super thanks here on YouTube, and if I go live, you can use the super chats as well. And you can download this program anywhere you get your podcasts, even on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, using the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast. And I also want to let you guys know that there is a write-up for this show. The production notes of this program are available now at zodiackillercode.com. Please visit zodiackillercode.com for lots of Zodiac-related material. And I would like to switch gears a little bit and talk about something else that is going to be more related to how do we solve cold cases? How do we solve a Zodiac Killer or style mystery? How do we solve the Zodiac Killer mystery, period? Because a lot of people are wondering, yes, we can talk about things online, but what are the methods that we can use to do something like this? And I have to give a shout out to Gina Lynn, who posted this on Facebook. She shared some promotional material from a presentation that was done by Joe Kennedy, and he is the author of the book Solving Cold Cases, Investigation and Techniques and Protocol, again written by Jody Kennedy, also with Hogan Hilling. And they're talking about how do you solve cold cases. And in the material that Gina was sharing on Facebook, it says that there is an entire list on how to solve a murder. Well, let's look at this in relation to the Zodiac Killer mystery. Number 1, evidence, witnesses, and confessions. Number 2, reading the crime scene. Number 3, the killer's name is in the file 90% of the time. Well, maybe it was Arthur Lee Allen the whole time. We can all go back to work, go home, and just turn everything off. It was Arthur Lee Allen. The killer's name is in the file 90% of the time. Number 4 is, who does not belong at the crime scene? Number 5, teams solve murders. Oh yes, absolutely. It's one of the reasons why I do this show, so I can connect with you guys in the audience. That's one of the reasons why this is an interactive show, and I'm always saying that you can send me things at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. And one thing that I learned very early on when I was running this channel is that you don't just watch 6 or 7 YouTube videos and think that you've solved a true crime case. You don't just go down the rabbit hole on your own and then act like you figured everything out, because what happens is you're going to get tunnel vision. You're just going to be thinking about the same things over and over again, and you're just going to be reshaping the information to fit something, or maybe you're going to be connecting the dots in your own way, but it's still done in that tunnel vision mindset. You're thinking about something new, but it could be completely wrong. It's not simply about how you can arrange the information to make sense. It's about what actually happened. Teams solve murders because people on your team can call you out on that and say, hey, now, wait a second, what about this problem in your theory? And the next point is, all crimes are geographic. Most murders aren't planned. The killer almost always tells someone, "Oh, now wouldn't that be great?" But see, the problem with the Zodiac Killer mystery is the Zodiac definitely told someone, right? Did the Zodiac not write letters? Did the Zodiac not make phone calls after multiple crimes, the Blue Rock Springs shooting and the Lake Berryessa stabbing? And the next one is life deterioration or improvement. So, how to solve a murder, life deterioration or improvement? I mean, improvement would get somebody more into the public sphere. Deterioration would get somebody more likely to confess. Fair enough. And then the next one is ruses, cons, tricks, and surprises. Oh, sure, you could solve I think you could solve a mystery with any of those, especially if you can con somebody into revealing something, or you can trick somebody and surprise them into revealing something. That might not be what has been shared in this presentation, but it's a good point all the same. And the next one is DNA technology. I think that this one goes without saying. We don't need to give any more praise to DNA technology. You guys understand it all. And then empathy, intimacy, and rapport. Empathy, intimacy, and rapport, I think, would be more about extracting information out of someone during a specific type of confession. But I just want to turn it over to you guys. How are we going to solve a true crime case? How are we going to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery? What type of method are we going to use? I think all of these things here are very solid. What stands out the most? Evidences, witnesses, and confessions? Confessions, absolutely. A confession. I mean, we have the evidence, we have the witness statements. The Zodiac Killer mystery is still unsolved. A confession might do it. Reading the crime scene is definitely going to be difficult after the fact, but the killer's name is in the files 90% of the time. Even though I was just joking around about Arthur Lee Allen, I wouldn't be surprised for a second if the killer's name was not on the files in the Zodiac Killer mystery, because the Zodiac was a little bit sneaky. So let's go on to something else that was shared in this material that was put forward by Gina, and again, she's sharing the stuff from Joe Kennedy, but it talks about the differences between organized and disorganized crimes, and I'm thinking that this is heavily influenced by John Douglas, the famed FBI profiler, but there's just a list of what goes into organized crimes. Planning, methodical, intelligent, stalks victims. The victim is a stranger. Okay, well, yeah, you could do both. You could stalk the victims, and the victim could be a stranger. That would just mean that the killer sees somebody, a man or a woman, that he wants to fixate on for any particular reason, and he decides to follow them. Control, use of restraints, brings a weapon with them, transports the victim. Now, this is really odd because the Zodiac Killer did some of these things. For example, at the Lake Berryessa stabbing, the Zodiac was very organized. He used restraints on the victims. At Lake Berryessa, he brought a weapon with him. He brought a weapon with him every time, actually. You could say that he was stalking the victims. I mean, if he walked such a substantial distance to the area where the Lake Berryessa stabbing took place, yeah, I think that's fair to say he was stalking the victims. And the victim is a stranger. Well, as of now, we don't know 100% whether or not the Zodiac Killer knew any of the victims, but it's kind of leaning that way. Now, these are the characteristics of disorganized crimes, again from Joe Kennedy's presentation. Disorganized crimes are spontaneous offenses. They know the victim, minimal conversation, sloppy crime scenes, victims lie where they die, body left in view, and the evidence is present. Goodness, doesn't that sound like a completely different type of offender? Or, allow me to correct myself, that sounds like a completely different type of crime. The Zodiac Killer's first two crimes were the Lake Herman Road murders and the Blue Rock Springs shooting. I mean, those sound spontaneous offenses. We don't know enough to say whether or not they were spontaneous, but, I shouldn't even tell you guys this, but I will anyway. I was once talking with somebody from Germany, and I used the word spontaneous in a sentence, and she said, "Spontaneity stems from a fake identity which doesn't exist." And I was like, what, excuse me? "Something cannot be spontaneous and have an identity. It is only a set of repetitive behaviors." And I was like, huh? She just threw that at me, and I completely admit that she had more IQ points than I do, that she probably has more IQ points than I do, wherever she is. But ultimately, I agree with that. Spontaneity stems from a fake identity which doesn't exist, and it's just a series of repetitive behaviors. So as far as this thing about spontaneous offenses, Repetitive. Think about this. There is some type of cause and effect that is recreated over time. Maybe something happened to somebody the day before and it didn't bother them. Maybe it happened to them that day and it did bother them. So that's not spontaneous. That's repetitive. And I know I'm deviating from this, but I just wanted to make it clear that there probably was a reason that drove this person to kill. Now they know the victim. Well, we have insufficient evidence to say that the Zodiac Killer knew any of the victims at any of the crime scenes. Minimal conversation. Again, at Lake Herman Road, we don't know what was said. At the Stein murder, we don't know what was said. And I'm also going to take an unpopular stance. I don't think that we know if anything was said at the Blue Rock Springs shooting. In fact, the unpopular stance is, I don't believe the Zodiac Killer said anything to Darlene Ferrin and Mike Michaud. I don't believe the story about how the Zodiac walked over and he said the name D and she said the name Richard. I don't think that happened. I think that is just the story evolving and being misshapen over the decades. Sloppy crime scene. Let's look at the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, and the Stein murder. Very sloppy crime scenes. Very, very sloppy crime scenes. The Zodiac left shell casings behind at Lake Herman Road and Blue Rock Springs. The Zodiac mishandled Paul Stein's body, and he tried to wipe down the taxi cab in some way, which he claimed was leaving false clues, but I don't see any evidence to say that was a neatly kept crime scene. I mean, if anything, Lake Berryessa would be neater because he stabbed the victims. The only thing he left behind was the restraints, and he even wrote a message on the car door, which, I mean, shows some aspect of neatness. But one thing that the Zodiac Killer did as a commonality in all of the crime scenes, and I come back to this all the time, is that the victims lie where they die. So that's just a commonality among all of the Zodiac crimes, among all of the Zodiac crimes, and even most of the unconfirmed crimes, like going from 1962 to 1969. The victims were primarily not transported. Now, there are victims like Kathleen Johns and Donna Lass who were possibly in the presence of the Zodiac Killer, but we don't know that 100%. In the ones that I just cited, the victims stay where they are. That's disorganized. Bodies left in view. Same with everything I just said. Evidence present. Same as everything I just said. And this goes to show that the Zodiac Killer did not make a strong effort to destroy the evidence, to move the bodies. So these are disorganized crimes. Now, is it possible that the Zodiac was a disorganized serial killer and that he just upped his game a little bit once with the Lake Berryessa stabbing and made it a little bit more organized? I could go with that. I could go with that. I could sign on board with that type of observation. But if we look at the info that has been put here in regards to disorganized crimes, they know the victim. I absolutely think that this is going to be present with the majority of disorganized crimes because of the following issue. Because of the following reason. I think what Joe Kennedy is talking about is that somebody gets into an argument at home and then they hit someone with an object, that person dies, that counts as either murder or passion-provoked homicide, something of that sort. Manslaughter would be another possible charge. All right, so that would be a disorganized crime because an argument just got out of control and somebody was killed because of it. Drug deals gone wrong, and would fall into that category. Yes, crimes like that would be disorganized where they know the victim, but I just don't see any ounces of evidence to indicate that the Zodiac Killer knew the victims. But I would just like to give credit to Gina Lynn once again for sharing that, and one more time, those are from the presentation from Joe Kennedy, which I will perhaps discuss in the future and perhaps go through his book as well. But please weigh in the comment section down below. What do you think? What do you think about these observations about the Zodiac Killer being an organized or disorganized offender? And if you want to talk about spontaneity in the comments as well, give me everything you got. I'm always open to these types of subjects. Now, moving onward, I would like to return to a subject that I've only talked about briefly on this channel before, and it is the Soleil Productions graphic novel about the Zodiac Killer. Serial Killer Series number 1, The Zodiac Killer. And the last time I discussed this book, I was going over the Lake Berryessa stabbing and the preparations that the Zodiac Killer made using his kill kit. And this is one where I really wanted to continue with, because at the very least, I at least needed to go through Presidio Heights and look at how they would have the Zodiac Killer murdering Paul Stine. And I think that there is something that is connected to this presentation from Joe Kennedy that I have to tie in. Who doesn't belong at the crime scene? Well, this isn't exactly the crime scene, but the Soleil Productions graphic novel featured an elderly man looking out and staring at the Zodiac Killer as he was walking up a set of steps. Now, if anyone doesn't belong, I would think it was him, because we have numerous other witnesses that saw the Zodiac Killer that night, and one of them should not have been the elderly man on the steps. For example, we have the Robbins kids who saw the Zodiac Killer from a window. We have the unnamed witness who saw the Zodiac and claimed it was Xenophone Anthony. And then we have officers Donald Falk and Eric Zelms, who are also featured in the graphic novel. And when they had Falk and Zelms talking to the Zodiac, they just brought up this overdrawn cartoon of the Zodiac that looked nothing like the composite sketch. And I don't know why they tried to do that. Maybe they're trying to make him look ghoulish and horrific. But I mean, it was just a very almost silly way of portraying the Zodiac Killer. And I mean, when you think about the people that I've just mentioned, though, let's come back to this point. Who doesn't belong at the Presidio Heights crime scenes? Do the Robbins kids belong there? Yes, they live there. The unnamed witness? Yes, he lived there. Falcon's Elms? Yes, they were responding to something. Pelicetti and Peta? Yes, they were responding to something. They were supposed to be there. Really, the Zodiac is someone who is the only person who didn't belong. And of course, Paul Stine, but Paul Stine was instructed to drive into Presidio Heights. I can touch upon that in a future segment. I mean, by future segment, well, why don't we just discuss it right now? Another book that I've been meaning to revisit is Obsessed by Mark Hewitt. Obsessed, My Relentless Pursuit of the Zodiac Killer. And this one is going to discuss some things that are in relation to Presidio Heights. But I want to provide a little bit of introductory material. And that is that we have a lot of opportunities to talk to people now via the internet. And what a lot of us do, even me, just getting on social media and talking to people about the Zodiac Killer is something I do all the time. But sometimes people meet up and they just have someone that they talk to regularly about true crime cases. And Mark Hewitt had someone that he would just meet up with regularly, go through the Zodiac material with. And that person's name was Kevin. That's not his real name, but that's what he's called in the book. And Kevin and Mark began to make certain observations about the Zodiac Killer mystery, and I'm going to go through some of them right now. Let's stick with Presidio Heights. What did they say about Presidio Heights after discussing the case? It seemed that Paul Stine, the taxi driver, was murdered in Presidio Heights because the Zodiac Killer knew about the proximity to the Presidio, the military installation that was there, and that could have provided him with numerous exit strategies, numerous getaway points, and that goes to show that there is a certain element of planning. And this is so weird because it's like the Zodiac is both organized and disorganized at the same time. Maybe a better way of putting it is the Zodiac is 50% organized, a 50% organized serial killer. But I would love to know what you guys think about that. But there was more interesting observation that Mark and Kevin, giving a shout out to him, whoever he is, that Mark and Kevin were talking about in the book Obsessed, and that is that what type of occupation did the Zodiac Killer have? For example, the Zodiac is the type of person that would sit down and not only write letters, but the Zodiac also composed ciphers. And I bring this up all the time that Robert Graysmith, a cartoonist, called the Zodiac ciphers works of art. The Zodiac also drew out bomb diagrams. And what Mark and Kevin came to the conclusion is that this is the type of person who has a desk job. This is the type of person who sits down at a desk and works from behind a desk. And I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. Desk job, well, that must mean that he was an office worker, right? No, not necessarily. For example, Mark Hewitt is ultimately going to settle on the Zodiac Killer suspect Ted Kaczynski, who was the Unabomber. And Ted Kaczynski was a professor within that category. And you could even go more intense than that, about just beyond office workers and academics. Even if somebody is going to be a mechanic, then they work in a mechanic shop. The mechanic shop is probably going to have some type of office-style room with a desk in it, and this person could be working with their hands for most of the day, and then they're going to sit down with the books late at night and so on, depending on the type of mechanic shop that they have. But that would be somebody who is exposed to a type of desk in a different environment. I'm just listing off some of the possibilities here. How about something even bigger than that? Mechanical engineers. How about people who are draftsmen who are going to be sitting down at desks like this? These types of discussions have been happening very frequently. So I understand everything that Mark Hewitt was saying in the book Obsessed, and that's a very wide range, though, that the Zodiac was someone who would sit down regularly at a desk during his working hours. But if anything, it does narrow the pool a little bit. And please give your response in the comment section down below. I would love to know what you guys think. And if you do read the book Obsessed by Mark Hewitt, it talks about a lot of different stories that are interwoven into this memoir about his explorations into true crime cases, particularly the Zodiac Killer. But as I've said on some previous Zodiac Mondays, he talks a lot about Manson in the book, but it really is a true crime memoir that is covering the general aspects of the true crime world. And one case that was discussed here is the murder of Rachel Timmerman, and that is not a Zodiac crime, but I'm definitely going to have to explore that one more on True Crime Talk Radio, because a woman was murdered and she was found drowned in the water, but her daughter was never located. So there is a mysterious aspect of that that I simply can't shake, and I'm going to have to explore that more in the future. And you can read all about this stuff in Obsessed, My Relentless Pursuit of the Zodiac Killer by Mark Hewitt. And lastly, I would like to give a shout out to Sam Fisher, who recommended a website to me called ZodiacKillerTruth.com. And this is going to be exploring a new Zodiac Killer suspect, whom I will touch base with you guys with on the next Zodiac Monday. And all I know about this suspect is that he has some Navy connections to the USS Enterprise, and I've talked about a different Zodiac Killer suspect named Loring Dale Hill in the past, who was also on the USS Enterprise. And the Enterprise was out of the Bay Area from January 7th of 1969 to July 2nd of 1969. So this would be a very clear explanation of that stuff that I was talking about at the beginning, that we can't simply say that the Zodiac was in California in 1969 for the entire year. It's not like he's just sitting around plotting and planning his next move. He could have easily been stationed out of the Bay Area with the military, and I look forward to exploring this new suspect. But if anyone wants a primer, they can go to the website ZodiacKillerTruth.com. And thank you so much for listening to this Zodiac Monday. One more time, you can download the show at Black Box True Crime, Black Box Podcast, anywhere you get your podcasts. And you can also follow the show at blackboxonlineradio on Instagram and TikTok, Ned DeHaan on Facebook, Black Box Online Radio for the Facebook page. And I will be with you guys later this week talking about D.B. Cooper. You can also check out some of the shorts. And that will be all for me. Goodbye.